Welcome back to A Writer's Mind. I'm your host, Delcherie Spinner, and I have finally made some progress on the Karmic book, and actually like a decent amount of progress. So that's nice to see because I've just had a hard time writing lately. I kind of finishing up the end of the school year is always stressful, and I'm like a couple weeks into summer break and, taking care of stuff, wrapping up other things, demolishing trees in my backyard, things of that nature. But I was able to finally kind of get my head in a writing space. I had written chapter 2 and chapter 3, and then kind of realized I needed to turn chapter 3 into chapter 4 and go back and insert a new chapter 3 when I knew there were some issues and I just wasn't sure how to fix them yet. So anyway, I think in the last update I had started chapter 2 or I was kind of like getting some thoughts together for chapter 2 and thinking about how big of a role Katie was going to play because I was starting to get a sense of her character and maybe I would keep her around. And I'm almost completely sure that Katie will stick around as a character through, if not the entire book, most of it, which will be really hard if I have to kind of ditch her as a character right at the end. We'll see. Part of that is like, as I've gotten to know her over these last couple chapters that I wrote, she's not only a really fun character to work with, I'm enjoying her personality and just like the energy that she brings to the story. She's a good contrast to Beatrix, who is kind of negative and jaded at this point, frustrated with her career and how things are going. Katie is a good complement to that because she's very bright and cheerful and says what she thinks and, just kind of one of those people that's just like, she is what she is, and you figure that out in the first like 5 seconds of talking to her. I'm almost positive Katie's going to stick around for at least like 85-90% of the story. We'll see what's needed at the end of the book. It might be necessary that Beatrix is just going to have to jump someone else to wrap things up. So we'll see how that goes. But like I said, I did have a lot of fun with these chapters of getting to know Katie a bit more. So where I'd left off before, we'd kind of gotten through the career day and she was kind of getting out of the school, escaping that situation. And because Katie is starting to wake up, or, her consciousness is kind of coalescing again, and she's becoming conscious of what's going on, and understandably, kind of freaking out that there is some other consciousness in her body, and she does not love that at first. So we get a little bit of explanation here for the reader, for Katie, of what exactly is going on. I throw in some basic details, but I tried not to be like too explainy here and kind of just follow that rule of like give the absolute bare minimum of what the reader needs to be able to move forward. And then, sprinkle the rest in later. So Beatrix kind of gets in the explanation that she's a karmic agent, kind of like the FBI is how she explains it, and she's there to investigate a disturbance, and that means taking over a human's body. And, like I said, while Katie's not like thrilled about it, she is an adventurous person with kind of just like go get it attitude. So she's like, this could be interesting. Even if, she's kind of stuck, she's intrigued by the possibility of participating in this and just kind of like this is kind of crazy kind of adventure. She's up for it. So they kind of get interrupted though when Cal forms a connection and kind of breaks in to start being himself and pissing everybody off. So this part of the chapter really gives the reader a sense of who Cal is, and along with that lets Katie come into herself a little bit more as she reacts to Cal and kind of inserts her commentary into what's going on as she's observing what a ridiculous situation he's created by his like pettiness and ineptitude. So he kind of breaks into their conversation, and this also, like, I gave some hints in chapter 1 that Beatrix does not love working with Cal, but now here is where you really get to see the dynamic between these three characters and what you're going to get through the rest of the story. So Cal's pettiness and incompetence is highlighted. he has basically drug Beatrix into the situation with no information whatsoever. She has no idea what's going on. She's just been shoved into things. And then he shows up making the connection of like, okay, so what's the update? Like, what have you accomplished? And she's basically been on Earth in Katie's body for like 30 minutes, and she doesn't know what the situation is. So he's obviously being super unreasonable, which Katie picks up on very quickly. And it's just like, what the heck? Like, why would you do that? And she asks, over the course of this, she keeps lodging complaints by just like shouting them, basically, because Beatrix tells her that basically like their interactions in some way, you know, the whole investigation creates a karmic log that people review later. And so anytime she gets mad, she just like shouts a complaint into the void, basically, assuming that at some point when someone reviews the case log, they're gonna see all of her complaints about Cal and maybe do something about it. So she kind of has that like, this isn't right and somebody should fix it kind of attitude. But in the moment, nobody can fix it because they're stuck over there. So, and then Cal kind of just continues to show like what a jerk he is. And he's very demanding. He gives her, you know, the bare information possible while expecting like these grand strides in whatever's going on. And he's completely dismissive of Katie's outrage that her career day presentation was messed up and that he's not more helpful. So a lot of this early, probably first half of the chapter is some characterization, showing their personalities, how they're going to interact with each other, and some of the conflict that's going to cause within the bigger conflict by these three very different personalities of Cal being very petty and willing to complicate things and make problems, even if it makes him look bad. Like if the mission's not successful, he still finds that like satisfaction in having made things worse for everybody else. And then you've got Katie, who is very positive, very humanistic. She sees the best in people and believes that things can like improve and be better, but she's not afraid to stand up and point out when something is not as good as it could be. And then we've got Beatrix, who is, as I said earlier, kind of in a negative headspace. She's frustrated with her situation. She's still going to do her job 1,000% because that's important to her and who she is and how she's seen. But she's a bit bitter at the moment at still being kind of dragged around with Cal and being put on these missions that she considers generally kind of beneath her. Although this one is going to, as things are starting to like formulate in my mind a little bit better, this case was given to Cal because it appeared fairly simple at first glance. And so they're like, we can give it to him. It's probably one he can't mess up. But it's actually going to turn out to be quite a bit more complicated than anyone anticipated, which means actually that Beatrix was a great person for this to go to because she's actually going to put in the time and energy to figure it out. So first half of the chapter, as I said, kind of just a lot of characterization while getting some information out about what's going on in the world and what Beatrix has actually been dropped into. And they finally get toward the end. He tells them, you know, this disturbance is centered around the water treatment plant where Katie works. And that kind of makes Beatrice suspicious off the bat because it sounds like, oh, well, this is where it's at and this is a person who could help. And Cal doesn't usually do that. He usually finds someone who's very unhelpful, at least as a starting point, and then she has to work her way to more helpful people as she goes. So she's kind of at the very start like, I don't think this is what anybody else thinks it is, because that would be too easy. And that doesn't, you know, line up with how she's been treated in her world, and particularly with Cal. He kind of gives the basic details, and then he's like, all right, I'll send you the mission brief as soon as I disconnect. And then right before he disconnects, this is something that I came back and added later. I'd had them kind of ending the chapter with just kind of griping about Cal, and he says he'll check back in 4 hours, and you know, she's kind of just like, geez, like 4 hours of not dealing with him. Not long enough. And I kind of left it there and ended with that because, again, like, at the time, I didn't know where it was going next. And so it was just like, okay, like here's the basics, here's how the interactions are going to work, and we'll see. We'll see what we're going to do there. So I will come back to the end of chapter 2 in just a minute. Because basically, like I said, I didn't really know what to do with the story next. But I knew that like there's still a lot that's left unexplained, and Katie's going to have a million questions. And so I started into chapter 3, but even as I was writing it, I knew I was like, I am going to have to come back and change this because it was a lot of information and explaining and not a lot that was actually happening in the story. And so I kept writing because I was like, well, I do need this information to come out at some point. But I also knew like just dumping it all here in chapter 3 in the long run, like that was not going to work. I don't like to have big, just info dumpy chapters. But for me, just to get the information out on the page and to know like what I needed to explain at that point was going to help me figure out how to break it up later. So I went into chapter 3 and I had them, they're in the parking lot and she's kind of like, okay, where are you supposed to be now? Like what would be the normal next step in your day? And she's like, oh, well, I'm supposed to go back to work. Like I'm technically working now. I went to career day as like part of, public outreach, basically. Like she's still working. And Katie's kind of like, Beatrix was like, great. All right. But she's like, well, we do need to start getting some information about the water system and all of, so originally chapter 3, I had them just kind of driving to her work. They're having some conversation about what's going on. She's, as she's driving, like she's thinking, or she's skimming through the mission briefing that Cal has sent and getting some of the details of like what's actually going on. And it's not a lot, but it explains some of what's going on and just like why it's gotten their attention and why they've sent her down there. And, Katie has a ton of questions at that point too. And I'll come back to this bit in just a second. But like I said, basically I wrote the chapter knowing this is not going to work very well because it was just like information as we're driving. And it's something that as I've looked back at some of my older stuff, I tend to have sections of like, we're driving and we're talking and we're learning and thinking about stuff. And that's not very exciting for the reader. Like, yes, sometimes you just need a chapter where you're going to get some information out and they're driving in a car or whatever. But I was wanting to avoid that in such a big chunk, and particularly right at the beginning of the book, chapter 3, where it was like, you have kind of a funny start, then we have a conversation, and then it was like, oh, and then another conversation. So I knew I was going to need to change this chapter, but I hadn't really sorted out how or why. And Chris and I went to dinner that night, and I was kind of just, as we were chatting about our days, is like, well, I got some writing done, but like it's just a giant info dump, and I need to change that. And so we were talking about how I could maybe break that up, or what else needed to be going on in that section of the chapter. And we kind of started talking about bigger picture ideas for the book and where it was heading, like what was the point? And I was like, yeah, what is the point? What am I doing with this story? And as we chatted about it a little bit more, and I was kind of explaining, I was really kind of getting into like Beatrix as a character and her history a little bit more, and the point of the world in general, and why she's there, like why this thing is happening. And trying to figure out, like, is this just one isolated incident and it's just going to be like, oh, story in this book, story in this book, story in this book. Like, I had a sense, and I'd had some notes already written down that, like, yeah, it's going to be an episodic story as far as, different situation in different books. But I do want this overarching storyline that's going to guide the series as a whole. And I had an idea of, there's the interplay between the three worlds of the karmic, the not karmic, and the, chaotic karmic. And that they're always, trying to fight for this, well, balance on one side, dominance for the chaotic group. And then the humans are just kind of like, who knows? We're not aware of any of this. And so I had that sense, and I'd had maybe an idea of a storyline where Beatrix is actually fairly friendly with one of the chaotic agents. she looks at them as they're doing their job, and we're going to have, kind of these interactions here and there. But I didn't have fully like a sense of the overall storyline of the series. And I still don't. I haven't quite figured all of that out. My ideas are kind of coming together a bit more on what I want for a series storyline. But that kind of led our discussion toward what's the bigger story in this first book? Why are they targeting this town? Why are they targeting this area? Particularly, why are things kind of revolving around this one focal point if Katie is not actually like the center of it, if she's not a good person, strictly speaking, like if you just looked at the details, because as I mentioned, like Beatrix is suspicious of why she got put in Katie, because Katie looks like, oh, there's a problem at the water treatment plant. She works there. She's pretty high up. Good match. But Cal doesn't do that. He doesn't give her good matches like that. So it gives a sense that like Cal has an idea that this is not really what he's saying it is. So he's put her in Katie to be less than helpful. But I kind of wanted this to like come back around on Cal. I was like, yeah, you thought you were being a jerk about this, but actually, because it was more complicated than he could understand, he actually ended up being helpful in that process. And so as Chris and I were like chatting about this, and the fact that like I do want to keep Katie in the story close to the end or all the way to the end, I kind of came to the realization that like I did actually want it to be focused on Katie, but not in the way that you might think. And what I want is for her to be kind of a surprise center of this story that nobody really sees until the very end. And I'm still kind of developing the exact plot points that I'm going to bring in. But talking it through with Chris gave me a better sense of how I want the storyline to circle back around to Katie in a surprising way. And so I'm not going to tell the whole thing because I don't have it completely worked out. But what it helped me realize is that I do actually need to plan things out so that things focus back around to Katie and build that in. And so that means I need to show a little bit more about who Katie is and why someone from the chaotic karmic world would single her out and pinpoint her in this situation. But not in the way of like trying to harm her or trying to influence her, because some people on the chaotic side are going to be more easy to influence. Like someone who's already got a personality that leans toward causing problems and chaos, someone who's already aggressive, somebody who's unstable and can be influenced easily, someone who's got maybe some emotional or mental health challenges that makes it hard for them to spot manipulation and avoid it, that sort of thing. Those are going to be the type of people that are usually targeted by the chaotic agents, where Katie doesn't fit any of that. She's kind of the opposite of who they would normally target. But that doesn't mean that she hasn't caught their attention, because she is a force for good and positivity and stability. She wants to help people. She volunteers for things like career day. And I drop little things in here and there of just kind of what type of person she is. She's one of those people that people enjoy being around, that they're drawn to her in a positive way. And the karmic people would notice that and want to get rid of that. So she is not a target as far as they're not trying to influence her or hurt her. But if they cause enough chaos around her that then has a secondary impact on her, that can kind of like smush down her positivity and her goodness and all of that. And then they're kind of getting like bonus increase in chaos. If she's doing less good in the world, then that opens up more opportunities for negative things to happen. So I'm still working out kind of the details of how that's going to circle back around. But thinking about that gave me a new focus on what I need to do in these early chapters and where the story is going to go. So again, as I was talking about all of this with Chris, and he was like, I don't think you know what this story is yet. And I just started laughing. So I was like, no, I don't know what this story is yet. I have no idea where I'm going with it. But then talking it out some more just make me realize that I do actually want Katie to be a central figure in the story. And I think that's actually going to really help me explain how these worlds work together way better than what I had been thinking before. So it's going to build in some complexity, that it's not just, the karmic agents come down and they have a problem and they fix it and then they go back. And then the chaotic agents come in and they cause problems and then they're like, woohoo, yay, chaos, and then they leave again. Like that there is much more of a layered interaction between the humans and these two other dimensions. And this is going to give me a chance to explore that a lot more, which I think will help me build on it in the next books later. So that kind of took me back to, how do I get away from this super explainy chapter and add some action in early on? And I had kind of I'd had in mind as part of the explanation of what Beatrix gets in the mission report, she gets a list of victims. And basically these victims are what has finally kind of pushed her agency over the edge to say like, okay, we've been watching this and something seems to be going on, to now like, okay, we need to step in or it's going to start snowballing. So she's got this list of victims and several have died in the last few days. And that was what sent the alert up. Like, okay, it's not just illness. It's not just, something is causing a disturbance in the force. Now they're like, okay, people are dying. So we need to actually send someone down and figure out what's going on. And I had written that into the explanation that she gets this list of victims who've either been made ill and now several have died. So Chris had suggested, like, instead of just, giving a list of victims, how about there is a victim in that moment and they need to do something about it. And it took a little bit of chatting because problems popped up in my head of, how would she gain access? Would this spark some sort of weird investigation that then would complicate things and tangle things up? And because I'd been having in my mind that there's going to be, because I chose the water treatment plant, and there's going to be something related to water that's making people sick. That was my initial idea. And it's like, well, how would anyone control who got sick? Because I didn't want it to be like, oh, the whole town has gotten sick. This one reservoir, tank, this one tank has been poisoned. And like, that would be easy to locate. It's like, well, this water goes to these people and they all got sick. So, and that's actually like, it would be really hard for someone to actually like get in and affect the water supply of a town like that. There's a lot of redundancy built in. There's a lot of testing. There's a lot of security surrounding that. So that actually would be pretty complicated to achieve. And the person I have in mind who's actually like being influenced by the chaotic agents and causing a lot of this problems was like, there's not really any reason he would have access to be able to do something like that. And I want this to be realistic. Like, this isn't, a chaotic agent super spy who's come in and can, pick locks and has technologies and all of that. These are regular people getting influenced to do not great things. So I was kind of already on the fence about my original idea of something being wrong with the water. And then also that's just too simple. And I want it to be more complicated than that. So I had thought that, there'd be this list of victims. Some of them have gotten ill or experienced some sort of out of the ordinary adverse condition. And then some of them have been dying. And the most vulnerable populations are children and older people. So those are the people on the list. And I had been, thinking at first, like, it's going to be a disease that gets into the water and causes people to get sick. And then I was like, no, like maybe poison, and somehow it's going to be more targeted. So it appears very random and it's not going to be immediately connected. If a whole neighborhood suddenly gets sick, that's going to throw up a lot of red flags. So I didn't want to stick with my original idea because it was going to be too easy to set off alarms and then too easy to identify how it happened. So I want the instances to be more random. And this is something that as I was talking with Chris, we chatted about, and I like that not everybody is being affected in the same way, that there are multiple either plans going on or multiple people still working the details out on that. But it's not all the same when she gets the report. It's not like, oh, here's the exact symptoms and stages that each person goes through. And, some survive it and some don't. There's going to be different things going on that are not immediately something that would be linked together. It seems really random. And so that kind of led me to, okay, if I'm going to have a victim right in that moment, what exactly is that going to be? And basically, again, I'm still still working out all the details in my head, doing a lot of thinking as I'm, doing chores and cutting apart tree branches and stuff, is that the person who's at the center of all of this, who's being influenced by the chaotic agents, is in a position where he has access to, or she, I don't know. I just keep saying he because I haven't actually decided on who it's going to be yet. But whoever the person is that is doing this has access to people's information and has ways of contacting them in an anonymous way that is going to be very hard to track down. But he knows he's able to isolate specific people who meet criteria and then make a connection that introduces something that causes a problem for them. And so, like I said, children and older people are just, biologically the most vulnerable because of their systems and where their immune systems are and all of that. And so I thought on that range, I would rather have this opening scene being an older person because they have more medical emergencies just from the fact that they're aging and have more health problems in general. So I went with choosing that it would be an older person and that they're going to present as this seems like just another illness that's happening. This is a person who's got some health problems to start with, and it's not going to be immediately identified as what's actually going on. Because again, I don't want this to be too easy to figure out. So I went back to the very end of chapter 2, and where it had them previously kind of ending on Cal saying that he was going to send the mission brief, and they're just like, I hate that guy. Like, thank goodness we've got 4 hours to not deal with him. And then went immediately into driving to her office. I went back to the very end of chapter 2, deleted a couple of paragraphs, and I ended with him saying, like, basically, okay, I'm going to send you the mission brief. Oh, yeah, and someone's about to die. You have, like, maybe 15 minutes or so, And then he just cuts the connection off and leaves them to it. So again, instilling that dislike of Cal and his methods. And then that led me into a new chapter 3. So I just kind of inserted this here and shoved the explaining chapter down later in the document to look at later. So chapter 3 jumps into them both reacting and being like, what the heck? So Katie is freaking out because the idea of someone dying related to something that she feels like might have something to do with her. She's very panicked about that, especially old people and children. She's very, very upset when she hears that the victims are largely old people and children. Beatrix is a little bit more able to take command and be like, okay, we got to start doing something. Let's go. And then this gives me a chance to introduce how Beatrix interacts with the host's memories and bodies. So she kind of asks, she skims through the mission briefing really fast to find the list of victims and sees that there is a brand new addition of an older man who is not breathing well and kind of, as the mission states, probably about to die. And so she asks Katie where the address is. And as Katie's kind of panicking and not thinking very well, she gets a basic introduction to, yes, Beatrix can access her memories and pull out the information she needs, but it's like, Googling something, or in today's age, asking AI a question. It takes a second, and you might not get the right information at first. You might have to, query a couple times to find what you need. And so she's like, it's quicker for me to ask you. Just tell me where to go to get to this house. And so a little bit of information here that I put in the moment that it's needed. And then Katie also starts panicking of what? We can't just show up at someone's house and barge in and blah, blah, blah. We're going to get arrested. And so she's kind of pointing out some of the problems that had run through my head earlier, where I was like, how do I make this work? Because, yeah, if you just run banging to someone's house and are pounding on the door and let me in, something's going on, somebody's going to die. Oh, you're going to get the cops called. And then, then there's an investigation, and that's going to complicate things. And I didn't want to bring in a police investigation on top of what they're trying to do, because that was going to put a spotlight on her and make it harder for her to go out and about and do what she needs to do if she's got cops watching her thinking she's like a crazy lunatic. So Katie kind of throws some of those questions out that I initially had, which forces Beatrix to quickly come up with a plan. And so basically, she uses the fact that Katie works for the water company and kind of just throws it out there like, oh, I'm here on behalf of the utilities department. We had some complaints in the neighborhood. Are there any problems? And an older woman answers the door and she's not great with English. And she's kind of just like, no, it's fine. My husband's sick. Like, I don't have time to deal with this. And she tries to just get rid of her. And so Katie kind of, again, the woman doesn't totally understand like why she's there or who she is. And Katie kind of uses that confusion to be like, oh, he's sick. Oh, no, I work for the city. Like, I can call someone. Let me help you. And the lady is just kind of like, yeah, I guess like he needs help. And so she does let her into the house. And she's kind of saying she's a person who is less likely to call for an ambulance or police because, that could easily get turned against her. And I've kind of set it up. It's a town. I used my home state of New Mexico to set this in because it felt like like a good place. And sidetrack, because I forgot to mention this, I went back and added in chapter 2 because I hadn't given the town a name or really like settled on where it was. But as I was writing this section, I was like picturing, where I live and some of the cultural and political conflicts that come up here. And it was like, yeah, this really fits with where this story is going. So loosely based kind of on this area that I'm familiar with. And I decided, I chose a name as I was like, what should I name this town? A funny occurrence popped back into my mind that there was a little preschool near where I live that actually just got demolished because they're building a new one. And at one point, my daughter actually went there when she was little bitty. And I either didn't know or remember or who knows, but I think that their little mascot for the preschool must be an eagle. And it's preschool, so somebody at one point had thought, like, oh, like baby chicks in a nest. And they'd put up this like welcome sign on the fence. This was a couple of years ago that I remember seeing it. That was like, welcome to the eagle's nest. And I was walking the dogs when I saw it, and my son had been in Europe that summer visiting they weren't engaged yet, but his girlfriend at the time where she was stationed, and he and a friend went to Eagle's Nest, which was something Hitler built. And, it was kind of, you can go read about that, but it was just funny because when I saw that sign on the preschool, I was like, wait, why would they say welcome to Eagle's Nest? Do they not know that is like, mountain bunker that Hitler built in Germany? And maybe someone told them because the sign disappeared pretty shortly after, and then I haven't seen it since. So maybe somebody was like, maybe that's not the best thing to call this preschool or to have as the mascot, and like that's not the best phrasing to use. But it just stuck in my mind as funny. And so as I was thinking about what should I name this town, that immediately popped into my head, and I was like, yep, this town's going to be called Eagle's Nest. And Beatrix, who, has been around for like 3,000 years and knows all about that, questions that and is like, wait, what? Why would they name this town that? And it is funny because I had forgotten, and Chris pointed out that there is actually a place in New Mexico called Eagle Nest because there are eagles there. And so it's not that's like out in the middle. This is a fake town, Eagle's Nest, that, Katie explains, the people here had never heard of that. And she's like, well, why didn't they change it? And it's like, who knows? It's that kind of town. So sidetrack to talk about the town and where they are. So I'm picturing this being kind of a small to medium-ish town, like big enough to have their own city services, but small enough to have problematic conflicts and strong opinions on certain things that cause additional conflicts. So this poor woman who finds Beatrix at her door asking about utilities and saying like, no, but like my husband's sick, I don't have time to deal with this, is uncertain enough, and she lives in a town where she could be, where calling for help could cause other problems for her and her husband. So she's reluctant to call for help. She's kind of like, well, he gets sick, like maybe he'll get better, but he's getting worse really quickly. And, Beatrix has obviously additional information to know that, like, no, he's not going to get better. So she talks her into calling for an ambulance, and she tries to ask a few questions, but it's kind of it's a chaotic moment, and she doesn't want to be like overly aggressive with the woman, but she gets the man help, and the ambulance comes and takes them both off, and she interacts with one of the neighbors a little bit to kind of get a sense of who they are and everything. And so I have it kind of set in my mind that she's going to go on with what she needs to do, but she's established a connection here that she's going to come back to as far as like reaching out, like, oh my goodness, like, yeah, we just wanted to check in on you and see how he was doing. So that kind of gives them an end to follow up. And I think in the next couple of chapters, they'll come back to this couple and start asking questions and start trying to make connections with other things that have been going on that they find in the mission briefing. So it introduces some action here. It does give me a little bit of a chance to bring in some of that information that I was looking for, or that I had already put in, but breaking it up a bit more with some interactions. And it also kind of without meaning to at first, because as I was writing, I was focusing in on, she's getting in there, she's trying to figure out what's going on, get help for the older gentleman, and just get through it. And as I probably got about like 2/3 of the way through the chapter, I was like, oh, like I've completely written Katie out of this chapter. Like outside of the initial, like, how are we going to get in here? Once Beatrix starts, goes up to the door and starts interacting, Katie kind of dropped out of the chapter. And I thought about that and I was like, well, do I need to go back and rewrite and have her insert here and there? And it didn't feel right with the flow and the way the chapter was going. I felt like having her insert comments or splitting Beatrix's attention, it didn't feel right with the chapter. So I thought about like, okay, why might Katie shut down in this situation? If she just kind of retreats to the back, lets Beatrix handle it, is that because, she's like, oh, I might get in the way, I might be distracting, or something deeper from her past? And I'd already kind of established that she was very upset about children and old people being harmed in this situation. And so I decided what I wanted to do was just like lean into that and see that she has a specific reason why she's especially soft-hearted toward older people. And that's because, she came back to the town to care for her father in his kind of final years. And so she was brought back to those moments of seeing this older gentleman fading. And that was a really hard thing for her to deal with because it made her think of her dad and, watching him decline, granted over a longer period of time. But she was taken back into those moments, and that was really hard for her to be in the middle of a situation like that, especially one that was more like emergent of, this is happening right now and somebody has to do something. And she wasn't really the person to be able to do something right then. So when I open chapter 4, I'd had all of that explainy stuff of them driving and blah, blah, blah. So again, kind of, I just like shoved that down. Literally, like I just hit enter a bunch of times to get it out of the way, to clear up the beginning of the chapter. Because I did not want to start with like, okay, well, now let's drive to your office. I wanted to take a minute to kind of explore Katie and how she was dealing with and processing that situation. Because, for one, just to get to know her character a little bit more, but because I also needed to establish, like, where are some of her, I don't want to call it a weakness to be, like, upset and traumatized by something like that, but in the sense of character, like, strengths and weaknesses, needing to identify where are some of her weak points where she's not going to be that person who's like, hey, this isn't right. We need to step in and do something about it. This was a moment for her where she's like, I cannot be the one to fix this situation because it was too traumatic for her. It was bringing up some really hard moments in her life. And so she and Beatrix have a conversation about that. When they get back in the car, instead of immediately taking action, they have a short conversation where Beatrix puts it basically as like, hey, it's okay if that was not something you can deal with. I just need to know why and if it's going to come up again. And basically, she kind of frames it as, like, if this is not an area where you're going to be able to step in and be of assistance in a moment like this, that's okay. I just need to know that ahead of time so I can, plan differently. She understands human trauma. She has dealt with so much of it over so long. She gets that people have their limits. And so this is not accusatory or judgmental in any way. She tries to handle it very compassionately. And Katie responds to that, and she shares about her dad, and just that, that kind of brought up all of that with her. And I kind of bring in a lighter moment as they start shifting gears, and it's like, okay, let's go to your office. Let's start digging through what's in the mission briefing compared to like her test results and what she's seeing, and see if there's any discrepancies. Like maybe somebody is fudging the test reports, and Katie wasn't aware that was happening. Not the case, but they've got to have somewhere to start, because there's not a lot of information in the mission briefing. And so they know there's a problem, but she's still not really sure where to start it. And so this is actually where I move the mention of like getting into her memory as like Googling something or asking AI. And I want to show Katie kind of like livening back up a bit, coming back to herself. And she's kind of like, oh, like you can see everything. And she's like, well, it's not like it's all just dumped into my head. And so she like mentions a name. She's like, okay, well, if you ever come across the name Alex Lowe, like just ignore all of that. And Katie's like, or Beatrice is like, no problem. That's fine. I don't need to know anyone's dirty secrets. And so just kind of a little bit of a moment of lightening the mood there, and showing that, yes, like Katie is a sweet and wonderful person, but, everybody's got their embarrassing stuff that they don't really want dragged out in front of everyone else. And then that kind of led me back into the original chapter 3 of digging into some of the details and explaining. I do trim it down. I moved a few bits to the end of chapter 2, and then here and there in chapter 3 to break it up a little bit. And then I add in an interaction with one of Katie's coworkers to, again, kind of just give a sense of that the world's a little bit bigger than the two of them, and to show just how she is thought of and liked in her workplace. And so they just have like a short conversation about how the career day went so poorly. And Katie prompts her like, oh, ask her about her cat. I always ask about her cat. And so they just kind of have a little bit of an interaction to help build out the world a little bit more, give a little bit more insight into Katie before they actually get to her office, which is covered in plants and stuffies and stickers. And it's just like an explosion of her personality that Beatrix is like, oh my gosh, how do you focus in this room? This is like total chaos. But Katie is just like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. We're back in a space that makes sense. So again, kind of showing their contrast and how they're going to play off of each other throughout this. And getting in a little bit more details, she gives a deeper explanation of the interaction between the 3 dimensions. Because Katie does want to know, she's like, if you're here to fix things, how come so many bad things still happen? And that's where she gets into, well, there are the chaotic agents as well. And, sometimes you're able to get in time to do something, and sometimes like you're not. Like it's a back and forth. You can't win them all, basically. Which she like understands, but she's still, like that's a frustrating thing for her, that you can't always fix things. You can't always make it better and make it right. So we get a little bit more information there, and then I broke it up with the conversation with the coworkers, so it wasn't just like info. We learn about her coworker's cat named Ham, because he is shaped like a ham. And he's just one of those like big blob of a cats that likes to eat and lay around. And then we get a little bit more into, they get to the office and sit down, and Beatrix then goes back through the mission briefing that Cal has sent to get more details. She had just kind of like skimmed for the highlights to figure out where the victim was before. But now she's actually starting to go through it. She finds the list of the other victims and realizes that they have different situations, different symptoms, and things are not exactly what she was expecting it to be. That she's like, there's some other weird stuff going on here that doesn't immediately make sense, which builds on that idea that she was a little skeptical early on. She's like, why would he put me in someone who appears might actually be related to the case and helpful? And this kind of adds on to that of like, something a lot more weird is going on here than anyone seems to have noticed so far. So I think I was able to, in this fourth chapter, to break up some of the information, add some more world building opportunities with bringing other people in and showing a little bit more of their personalities and what the situation might actually be compared to what the report makes it sound like there is. So again, I'm kind of just trying to build in more layers, establish some complexity. And this is also going to help me just make sure that I am pushing myself to make this interesting, to not stop at the first idea and be like, oh, sure, that'll work. I want this to be an interesting mystery that's going to keep readers engaged, not only, as they're learning about the world and these characters, but what is actually going on. And it'll be interesting to see, because with mystery type things, like some readers read mystery because they want to figure it out. They want to beat the characters. It's, kind of that race of like, can I put all the clues together? Am I going to be surprised? Am I going to be tricked? Did I see all the clues and put them together? There's kind of that type of reader. Some mystery readers, this is a little bit more me. Like when I read mysteries, I actually don't want to figure it out before the end. I'm not trying to race the character. I like to go through the process of figuring it out along with the character. And I enjoy being surprised by the ending. I hate it when I get 3 chapters in and I'm like, I know where this is going. And then it does go that way. And then I'm super disappointed when I get to the end of the book because I wasn't surprised. There weren't any details that connected in an unusual way. If I figure out the mystery before I'm supposed to as the reader, that's usually a disappointing reading experience for me, particularly if it's super early in the book. And you're like, oh, I've seen this pattern before. I know how this story is going to go. So I don't want that. I don't want this to be, it can appear obvious, oh, well, blah, 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 but it's not. It's not going to be the thing that you first think. And I'm still working out some of those details as I go and trying to, fill in those gaps of puzzle pieces that I don't have yet. But I am starting to get a much better framework of what is the point of the story, as Chris pointed out. What is the point? I am figuring out what is the point of this story more. That circling back around to Beatrix or to Katie is going to be a big part of that. But also just the complexity of these interactions. These 3 dimensions have a lot going on between them. And I want that to be mirrored in the actual mystery that she's there to solve and hopefully fix. She's obviously they're not going to be successful every single time they come down to deal with something. But I want there to be the same level of complexity between the worlds as there is in the characters and in the storyline of the mystery. Because life is messy. It's hard to know the right decisions, to connect all of the dots, to know, when there's these seemingly clear-cut divisions between good and bad. The karmic people see themselves as the force for good. The chaotic people, maybe not all of them necessarily see themselves as the bad force, but they see themselves as the opposing force. They're supposed to cause chaos. Chaos is their purpose. And then the humans kind of just, take the brunt of either side. But that's very deceptive to be able to say, well, this is good and this is bad. This is the right choice and the wrong choice. It's never that simple. And I think that's kind of what I want to get across with this series, is just the idea that real life is extremely complicated. And it's really hard to know always the right decision and what effect your actions will have on the people around you, on society, on, your immediate situation. You can think that you're doing the right thing. And then there can be, 10 unintended consequences you didn't even think of that end up causing other problems. It's not easy to figure out for the humans, but also showing the karmic and the not karmic people that some of them are so locked in and they think this is the thing. This is the correct way, the right way. This is our purpose. And really, none of this is going to be quite what any of them think it is by the end. There's a lot of exploration and learning and growing, I think, on all the characters' parts to really start to understand like just how complex and messy all of this is. And you can't go into something thinking you have the answer or you have the right way and then try to enforce that on other people. That it's never going to go the way you think it is. So like I said, I'm still not totally sure on what the overarching plotline is going to be. As far as like, I couldn't tell you the individual events that I need to happen to get them to figure it out. But I have an overall sense in my head of Beatrix and the other person that I have not figured out or identified yet. Her kind of opposite person in the chaotic karmic dimension of this kind of confrontation of she thinks things are one way, or she, who knows, that they have this idea of how things work and what's going on. And that is not how things work or what's going on. And having to kind of face that and look at how things operate and figure out if it needs to change or if things are just not what they said and they've kind of got to come to a realization in some way or another. Still figuring that part out. Obviously, a lot of details to unpack, but I would like to have definitely a more concrete sense of the series plotline by the time I get to the end of this book. So that way I can plan that out more and make any changes that I need to make in this first book. So I'm not stuck with something that I put out into the world in book one. And then later on, I'm like, oh, shoot, that doesn't work or make sense with what I came up with later. So as I'm figuring out this book's plotline, I'm really also trying to dive into what is the overall plotline of the series and I want to have a pretty firm grasp on that so that as I, come up with new situations for other books in the series, I can be building in consciously and with intention aspects of the overall plotline that will help me keep things consistent and make sense and not end up with weird problems at the end that I was like, oh, I didn't think about that, or I was just winging it the whole way through and now I'm stuck with some weird issues that I don't know what to do with. That is my goal. I think over these first 4 chapters, I've made a lot of progress in figuring out what this story is going to be and how these worlds work together. I still have a little bit of sorting out to do, well, probably more than a little bit, but I'm getting closer and it's starting to make more sense in my own head. And pieces are starting to fall into place as I'm thinking about them kind of in non-writing time. This is still living in my head and developing and growing as I go. So I'm not sure if I will do a little bit more work on this one or if I will jump back to the not karmic story with Penelope and Arya. I kind of need to just think about both for the next little bit, which I will do kind of today and give me something to put my mind on while I'm brushing out dogs and giving them baths this afternoon because they are filthy and smelly and that needs to happen. So I'll be pondering where I'm going to go with both stories as I kind of, work on some chores and do some other stuff around the house. And I'll see which one I settle on, where I, get some ideas for moving forward. And then I'll share that next time. So I don't know what I'm jumping to next, but I will have something else to talk about hopefully soon. All right. I will be back hopefully not too long after. Thanks for listening. If you want to check out any of my other books and just kind of the whole crazy process of republishing and changing my name and revising other stuff, you can find me online pretty much anywhere. I'm easy to find if you just search for my name. Benefits of having a unique name. But everything is housed together on my website, dilsheriespinner.com. Check out what else I'm up to, and I'll be back hopefully next week.